Welcome, Bitcoiners. More ridiculous, stupid stuff where machines and devices that are supposed to work don't work. I have, when I do the show, I create like a file of screenshots and the things I reference and blah, blah, blah. It just decided to not be on my device today. Who knows why, right? Who knows why? So I had to remake it right before. It's ridiculous. But anyway, good news is some things are permanent and predictable, unlike technology. Those things is the sun. It came up just as we all expected, right? And I checked another permanent thing. Bitcoin, it's running. We're good. Let's have a coffee and talk about all the stupid stuff. A lot of stupid news today, so we're going to go over it. So, first up, as you know, we like to start every episode with the fakest news we can find, right? The fakest news we can find. This one's great, right? This one's great. This is from Mehdi Hassan, who does his best over on MSNBC. And what he says is, and we're going to be talking a lot about the lab leak and COVID today and all that stuff. So he says, the simple reason why so many people weren't keen to discuss the lab leak theory is because it was originally conflated by the right with Chinese bioweapon conspiracies and continues to be conflated by the right with anti-Fauci conspiracies. Blame the conspiracy theorists. And, normally I do restrict myself from having to add a punchline, but there's so much to be added here. And I think Nate Silver, who you got to admit, as far as pollsters go, is the best in the business, right? He's really good. And I think comes across as pretty credible and not in the bag. And because he gets into fights with everyone. So Nate Silver, 538, says, this is so refreshingly honest. The bad people thought the lab leak might be true. Therefore, as journalists, we couldn't be expected to evaluate the evidence for it. And Nate Silver goes on to say, the reason this drives me up the wall is that if you're ever going to pretend that misinformation is a useful category, at least acknowledge it was a massive error to label the lab leak discussion as misinformation when multiple US government agencies now put the chances at greater than 50%. Now, what we saw yesterday, and this is sort of the biggest story that I saw yesterday, and there's a few ways we're going to analyze it, which is the CIA director appeared on Fox News. Now, first of all, you got to wonder, he's on Fox News, right? These are deliberate choices. Whoever doesn't know that there are political affiliations with American media networks is missing part of the show, right? So I don't think we need to go over too much that MSNBC is in the bag for a party and Fox News wrote the book on this stuff and is definitely in the bag for a political party, right? So we've seen that many, many times. So first of all, that Chris Wray went on Fox means we're trying, you can guess anyway, to lay down some astroturf and get some direct talking points into Republican right-wing conservative minds, right? That is the place you go. If you want to reach out to everyone who's obsessed with, let's say, school loans being forgiven, it's probably another network you'd go on, right? But here he's interested in discussing a little bit about the COVID lab leak. And came away from this, right? So on the show, when he was with Brett Baer on Fox News, he said that he confirmed, right, the origin of COVID was likely the result of China. So everyone who said the past few days, no, that's not what the proof says. Well, here's another one that says, yes, indeed, right? But here's what he also did, right? So we don't even need to analyze too much about what and even him being on the other than it was clearly to create a dialogue and discussion with that subset of Americans. What he also said is pretty interesting, right? So now remember, Chris Wray was the fella who went over to Davos. Remember he went to the WEF, right? Like the most ridiculous collection of clown world concentration that we can find anywhere on the planet at any given time is the Davos show. In many ways, Bitcoin 2023 is the counter program to there's a few people out there trying to take that mantle. We really have it because we've been doing it for longer than anyone. And I think of myself as someone who counter programs that when I work on the agenda for Bitcoin Magazine show, May 18th to 20th in Miami. So what else did he say on the interview? Well, remember he went to Davos and said our ability to coordinate with social media is getting better than ever. Remember he said a quote along those lines? I'm paraphrasing. I don't have the quote in front of me, but it's something like that. So what he said yesterday on Fox is he denied the FBI censored the Hunter Biden laptop story. He just flat out denied it, right? Which is a lie, right? Which is a complete lie. So he came right out and said, no, 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 no. Now, he also talked about the January 5th, January 6th pipe bombers, right? That it was an insurrection and there was all this violence coming from folks that participated. We still haven't seen it, right? So, again, to qualify everything that went on January 6th as an insurrection, of course, if you take 2 minutes and realize it's probably the first insurrection where a group didn't show up with weapons. And the whole argument remains there were rooms, right? They went into rooms, and the mere possession of that room, I guess, awards you the nuclear codes and complete control over the U.S. Republic. That's the argument. Remember that. That's the argument, right? If you go into all the power because there's like a magic lectern or who knows what else is there, right? So he lied about two things. So how much more do we need to actually give him any credibility with what he was saying as far as the lab leak stuff goes, right? Audio's glitching. How's the audio, guys? Let me know. My wife just said it's glitching again. Sound. I haven't seen any warning. So let me know. So what we see is the narrative right away probably becoming constructed, narrative becoming constructed. And what I mean by constructed is when you astroturf a narrative, you can use anchor bias, you can use narrative bias, you can use diversions, these types of associations in order to promulgate a half-true myth, right? A half-true narrative, half-true story. And the half-true stories are usually part of the went in and out as usual, but it is the way it is. Audio has only skipped twice, running strong right now. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. I'm going to keep doing these pre-records after in order to have some, higher quality stuff that you can share and help the channel grow. That would be great. What we saw from all of that stuff is a clear indication that there's a new narrative that's being astroturfed and trotted out, which is this China thing, right? So hold on a second here. My notes never got in order because of this stupid thing. And War Clandestine, who we've been talking about a lot lately. So even Tucker Carlson, by the way. So Tucker Carlson did a show on this, and he brought up the Chinese responsibility, let's say, for the lab leak, right? So he says, the origins of COVID were never a secret. The real story, the greatest outrage, is that the people who knew or should have known the truth lied about it in order to hide the Chinese government's role in mass murder. Now, again, FBI goes on to Fox and does agree with what Tucker Carlson is saying here. He's saying it's China, right? Now, I don't have any proof whatsoever that it's not China, but watching the lies line up between January 6th and what he also said about the Twitter files stuff, to me says, well, we should be suspicious of this goober, of this liar and this abuser. And what War Clandestine did is broke down the argument. And he used this DARVO formula, and I'm going to is in a second. DARVO, according to him, is a typical psychological manipulation tool used by abusers in order to deny the abuse and then attack the person accusing them of abuse, and of course then reversing the victim and offender order, right? So this is a very typical psychological framework for abusers. It looks an awful lot like projection as well, right? Projection has a very similar psychological trajectory is this? And War Clandestine breaks this all down in a series of tweets. Let me just grab them here because stupid thing wouldn't save it to this machine in the order that I saved it in, so I don't have to search for things. But I'll get it in 1 second. So, where is it? Where is it? Where did I record it all? I got it here somewhere. I got it here somewhere. So the first thing he says here is, we can't get answers, texts, docs, anything. This is from War Clandestine, from Ray and the FBI for years. And he suddenly volunteers to go on Fox News to admit the C-19 came from a lab. The deep state are trying to hijack the right-wing narrative in transition now that the lab leak cat is out of the bag. So what he's basically saying is they're trying to graft on their argument to what many on the right are already predisposed to believing, right? That America is the good guy, China is the bad guy, and they inflicted this on us. That's something that Trump said many times, right? Trump was very clear. He said, go look. He told the intelligence community, go look for proof this, right? That was out there. That was happening. He goes on to say, War Clandestine, the enemy recognized they can't keep the lid on the lab origin story anymore. So while the narrative transitions, they are trying to bait the right-wing China. This is why Ray went on Fox News, not CNN. The deep state targeting the right, hoping to divert the trail. It's a trap. And he goes on here to explain the actual psychological framework that I just mentioned with DARVO. And this is what he says. How in the shit did this not come? Notes. Terrible, 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 terrible. Here we go. There it is. Finally found it. So this is what he says. Those who pay attention to the UN grasp what's going on. Russia and China have been accusing the US of creating bioweapons at the UN for the last year. The US simply cried disinformation. After a 3-year cover-up, now they admit C-19 came from the lab and they blame China. From a pure logic standpoint, why the hell would anyone trust the US government or media after the last 3 years? How many repeated instances of dishonesty and deceit do we have to witness before we stop listening to them? What credibility does the US and the West stand on? I'm not saying Russia and China are saints, so this is his third tweet, but they have been a hell of a lot more right about COVID than the US. And Russia and China have been advocating for investigating global bioweapons capability and activity. The US have been throwing a temper tantrum. The US only account for roughly 4% of the global population, yet accounted for roughly 15% of COVID deaths. The US created vaccines, failed to prevent transmission, and were harmful. Maybe. The entire purpose of the US biological network failed disastrously. What I'm getting at is that on the global stage, the United States have lost all credibility. Russia and China are at least offering for diplomacy if the US pathogen engineering is addressed. But the West have repeatedly denied and declined and continue to push for more money and war. And then he goes on to conclude, right, that say what you want about the third world powers, Russia and China appear, and the US appear to be initiating a DARVO response, deny, attack, reverse, synonymous with sociopaths and those who are caught in wrongdoing. This is all the deep state has left. And indeed, we've seen that many times when we're talking about, for example, the elections, right? When you hear one group accuse the other of election denialism, when there's been on all sides for a while, right? I think Bitcoiners have understood it's not a partisan issue, election denialism. It's confirmation bias for what you want to see happen. And we probably haven't had elections that you can audit in any verifiable way in years. We haven't really had elections in years. We've had something that is pageantry. It might look like elections, but it's not elections, right? Bitcoiners understand that the trade-offs to create an election system and the system design that goes into engineering one of these electoral systems that has credibility can't just be manipulated for ease and convenience for some groups, but not others. And we've seen the massive explosion of voting by mail and all these other things that really have led to a really confusing that shouldn't be taken very seriously by anyone at this point, right? And this might have been going on for a long time, and I think all benefited from it, right? And that's why you don't want to hear anyone change, right? The reason why you don't have a massive focus on electoral reform in America is because everyone is gerrymandered, gerrymandering being the term used to describe how election systems can be corrupted in order to favor one party. That's been going on for years in all kinds of ways. And both parties accuse the other party of having a dishonest approach to elections, right? So it's been going on for quite a while. And this DARVO thing, minimizing, justifying, looks like it's happening at scale now in America. It looks like this has taken on a completely different form. Now, we don't have any proof about who created what. We're not scientists. We're not virologists. I have no idea, right? He says Chinese and Russians have been accusing Americans of doing this for a while. And now we have American intelligence saying the Chinese have been doing it for a while. But again, there's lying on every side. We understand that following the money would give us certain answers. Now there's some proof that who first raised the alarm about this in January 2020, having been created by potentially groups in America paying for research in both Ukraine, China, and perhaps how the virus moved from one of these jurisdictions to the other. That fellow was paid an awful lot of money to his tune, which he did within time. I have his name here. If my things would have been saved correctly, I would have been able to cite it without any. You've even got Elon Musk, right, talking about where this funding came from. You know, he mentioned, and we mentioned on this show the other day, War Clandestine says here again, that's because it didn't come from Wuhan. It was engineered in Ukraine, shipped to Wuhan in animal vectors. An outbreak happened in the West. We used Wuhan as the cover story to hide the biological stronghold in Ukraine. It was designed to look like a natural spillover event, right? So again, we have zero proof of this, zero proof. But if you follow the money, if you look at all the players involved, it still checks out. We don't have to change our worldview if you follow the money and apply this formula. Doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't mean it's true, right? It just means that you don't have to hallucinate anything. You don't have to imagine anything. If you follow the money, this story still aligns with following the money, right? So from there, right, from there, we can now start seeing that the propaganda machine, the DARVO approach here is all about saving the narrative and trying to astroturf something that might be useful, But things are changing quick. There's great news, right? So all of this discussion over the past few days, A.G. Huff, Dr. Andrew G. Huff, who has been talking about this stuff for a while, wrote a book called The Truth About Wuhan, How I Uncovered the Biggest Lie in History. And he's a former EcoHealth Alliance vice president and senior scientist. Dr. Andrew G. Huff has been saying more or less what War Clandestine has been saying for quite a while now. And we've repeated him on the show. Again, I haven't read the book. I probably should, probably will pick it up. He was on Fox yesterday, and this is what he says. So now that there's all this attention and all this focus, here's the good news, right? The big news from last night on Fox News with Jesse B. Waters is that my book, The Truth About Wuhan, is being made into a full-length feature film. I received several authors from filmmakers and producers, and I finally found a team of excellent people that I trust and are highly capable. Work begins soon on the movie. Millions of people are going to watch this film. Now, that is excellent news. Excellent news. First of all, as long as it's well-researched, right? As long as it follows the money and approaches what really did happen. Here's the thing. It's really easy, and this is the good news. It's really easy to convince normal people, average people, that there is some looming specter of corruption, right? As long as the medium that it's delivered in is coherent, entertaining, and it looks like we might get that. It looks like we might finally get a hard-hitting investigative journalism piece that puts everything together, follows the money, follows the players, and will be widely distributed. If that happens, the whole narrative could change really quickly, really quickly. I think many Americans are predisposed to believing some form of corruption because we've sensed it for a long time. We understand at a certain point we are in an abusive relationship with all kinds of institutions that have run their course in many ways, right? We talk a lot about how on this show, how everything we built in World War II to win World War II, the World War II war aircraft carriers, the institutions, the civil service, that's where the CIA really comes from, right? All of the information security organizations come from that era. And remember, they banned cryptography coming out of World War II as well because they understood it was major armaments, one of the major weapons that allowed World War II to be won by. You had the Turing machine that broke the Nazi Enigma machine and some of the original computers. And from then on, cryptography was a munition, like a bomb, like a missile, and it was illegal. Did you know that in the 1960s, it was illegal? Illegal. There was no such thing as studying cryptography at university. There was no course. The first textbook that is useful for cryptography came out in the 1980s by Bruce Schneier, called Applied Cryptography. There was no textbook before that, right? There was no curriculum. If you studied cryptography, they paid you to stop, right? Or worked for them. That's why when public key cryptography was invented by Martin Hellman and Ralph Merkle and Whitfield Diffie in the 1970s, it was the first civilian innovation. There are some people who said it was already created by national security apparatus years before. We don't know if that's true, right? But these guys knew that there needed to be a civilian deployment and activation of cryptography, and they managed to produce it and make it public and share the magic trick of public key cryptography before anyone could suppress it, right? So they rushed to publish, they rushed to have a public airing of what they had created, and their paper still starts with an amazing line: "We stand at the brink of a revolution in cryptography." And indeed, we did stand at the brink of a revolution. And these are the constitutional elements of Bitcoin, public key cryptography, that allowed Bitcoin to be deployed at scale. And I still argue it is the widest deployment of pure public key cryptography in the history of the world, because what was created alternatively for corporates to use, because everyone just decided we were too stupid in the 1980s to run cryptography ourselves, was public key infrastructure. Right? Public key infrastructure is really just all these honeypots of data, and then you trade your personal information for someone else to run your cryptographic keys for you. Right? That's what you're doing every time you sign up for something and you see the little lock come on your web browser, and that's the secure socket layer, the SSL layer. And from there, what you're really doing is just trading personal authentication information so that someone else runs your cryptographic keys for you. And that's not really public key cryptography as Bitcoiners now understand it to be, which is asset bearing keys that flatten the use of public key cryptography. So we're actually deploying the keys ourselves, right? So when we talk about World War II and the war machine, it's not an accident and not a little footnote of history that one of the things that was peeled away from the national security apparatus and intelligence services, if that wasn't done, if that wasn't one of the small little chinks in the armor of the battleship, never been shut off. They just kept everything running from World War II, the bureaucracy, the machines, the war machine, all of it, right? If that hadn't happened, we'd be in big, big trouble. But it looks like we took the most important weapon of World War II, de-weaponized it, and turned it into the most important psychological weapon. Hey, probably the only thing that can save us from these abusers, right? If we don't have a reference, if we don't have the capacity to see outside of this abuse, we'd probably be here, suffering from more psyop abuse just like everybody else. But luckily, we have this opportunity and this light that we can actually start breaking up with these abusers. That's why we call the show The Breakup, right? We have so many psychological relationships with the things that apparently brought us security after World War II, but haven't. And we're starting to wake up to that. And falling into these debates, part of how this trap works and functions, right? Now, that's not the only good news. That's not the only good news that happened yesterday. When we think about World War III and the context, and we think about what's already going on in Ukraine, it looks like Zelensky made a major, and he's not prone to doing this. This is one of the most media savvy, psyop savvy leaders in the world. You got to hand Zelensky all the credit for his talent. I mean, this is one of the most talented people communicating and projecting and all of these things in the world right now. And I think he'll always be remembered that way. Whether he gets remembered as a villain or a hero, we'll see. But here's what he said yesterday, and this is a turning point, right? This is the narrative slipping through people's fingers. I think huge flub on his part, right? So this is from Still Gray, who's reporting on that's Ian Miles Chong, who is reporting on an interview yesterday. And he says the U.S. will have to send their daughters exactly the same way as we are sending our sons and daughters to war. And they have to fight because it's NATO, and we're talking, and they will be dying. Right now, what kind of Americans really have to go over there? I think the answer is right. I think there's a couple of these volunteer people, but are they going to draft in America to go fight over there? Maybe it ain't going to work. That dog ain't going to hunt. Americans are going to run away. If you think you had a lot of draft dodgers in Vietnam, that's nothing compared to what's going on. The credibility of these folks is at an all on either side. And I can't imagine anyone called a terrorist, who's been called an insurrectionist, who's been called a racist, all the names that we've seen in this massive PSYOP campaign that's been projected onto Americans, the motivation just isn't there, right? So Americans quickly are breaking up with their image of their country, with their historical patriotism. That doesn't mean there aren't amazing things in America to be patriotic about. I think Americans will still have a core of patriotism based on a few simple principles. And I think it will even be Bitcoin, right? In many ways, Bitcoin has been helped by this American disillusionment. It's been helped by American cultural shift, particularly from the financial crisis and outwards. Americans have understood the financial engineers that have taken over the country, and I think better than anyone, right? You hear a lot of people have a mono sort of chromatic vision of Americans from outside. One of the best things, Canadians are some of the stupidest people in the world, like that's for sure, right? But one thing that we know more about than anyone else in the world, and this is obvious to Canadians when they have conversations with Europeans about Americans or Asian people about Americans, is Canadians understand Americans. We're neighbors, right? And we have a little bit of distance, and some Canadians are blinded by their own egos and their own little man syndrome, let's call it, about we're not Americans and we have healthcare and all that. But still, Canadians understanding media, Marshall McLuhan, for example, if you guys don't know who he is, have a read, right? The media is the message, and he is one of the foremost thinkers from the 60s and 70s on media theory, mass media, and these kinds of things. And so Canadians have a really interesting bird's eye view of everything that's going on in America. And I think, especially when Canadians have seen Americans embrace Bitcoin and embrace all this cultural change, we see the nuance, right? Americans were the first in the world to really understand the corruption of Wall Street and the banks and their cheerleading PSYOP propagators. So, when you put these two things together, you get Bitcoin, you get an understanding of the role of financial engineers in this. We're able to follow the money and understand where these PSYOPs are all coming from. But that's not the end of it, right? There's other big news today. And so you get Americans getting released from the illusions of the honesty of their institutions and the World War II narrative of America the good and the freedom fighter crumbling quicker than ever, and now being asked to go fight in a foreign war. I don't think it's going to happen. Right? I continue to predict no way. But here's the other piece of good news, and this comes from Japan and Korea. Right? Amazingly, two of the most important American imperial projects, right? And I think an example of what's good about the American system, right? America, instead of at the end of World War II, instead of subjugating the countries that lost, like Germany and Japan, paid for reconstruction. And Korea was sort of caught in the mix because of the Korean War after. And they said nothing to the Japanese about being this way or being that way, wear these clothes, wear, it was none of those things. It was just let your merchants be in charge, get rid of your war machine, and become prosperous capitalist nations. That's all they wanted. And now the benefits of this sort of hybridization of American commerce and culture mixed with the Asian environment have created the two most important nuclear in the world. And here's what you've got going on, right? You've got Japan, 12 years after. This is from Stephen Stepsinski. 12 years after the Fukushima disaster, Japan's public and policymakers are moving to embrace nuclear energy. This comes as the nation looks to boost energy security and hit its ambitious green goals. So, this is from Bloomberg. Nuclear power's revival reaches the home of the last meltdown. If you go to Fukushima area, it looks like they're going to restart it. It looks like psychologically the people are ready to move on, right? And it's not Korea. Amazing story. I didn't know any of this, but it is amazing. And it is that the South Koreans are going. South Korea. I've been to Ulsan. It's a city on the coast where all the largest cargo ships in the world are made. If you didn't know, Japan and Korea, in order to get foreign money in the past 100 and whatever years, the best way they could think of was to build massive ships because you could sell them for 100 million, 200 million. You get a lot of cash in your country really quick. So this was a known strategy to get more foreign cash into your country. And it works. So that's why you have some of the biggest shipbuilding operations in the world to this day in South Korea. I've seen these ships. It's unreal, right? I went there 20 years ago and saw some of them, and these were already just enormous things. To see them out of the water the way they were is unreal. And here's what they're going to be doing. The Korean team to develop a SMR powered ships. So that means they're going to develop small modular nuclear reactors inside ships, not just submarines either, right? They're going to be creating ones that have microreactors and are able to sail forever, move things around the world forever. And this is a big deal, right? If you get moving seafaring nuclear vessels for shipping and for leisure or whatever, you're totally changing the topography of energy in the world, which means that the petrodollar becomes way less important as far as powering trade and powering cross ocean transit, which is a huge change. Like huge. I mean, how much gas and oil do these machines use currently? That will all change. Right? That will all change. And it doesn't look like there's any way to stop it now. It looks like Pan are gaining in their own self-confidence to go out and build brand new things. And it might not even have ever been a self-confidence issue. It might have been the same as we saw with cryptography or 60 years ago when you were just paid to stop, right? US needed to propagate the petrodollar from a foreign policy and economic point of view. One can imagine they would disincentivize other countries from building innovations that would severely threaten that part of the market. So that's where we're at, and things are going to change quick, right? Robert saying, simulation is deflating the balloon. BTC and Noster are rising up for everyone. Indeed, right? And it's all happening kind of at once. We get Noster, we get the ability to really see Bitcoin technology scaling in a way that also spreads information and knowledge and allows the Bitcoin community and the psychology behind the Bitcoin community to push forward more and more, right? Bitcoiners are the first to dump the losers that would do this to us. We've already dumped them mostly, right? And we're just trying to get more people to understand they've got to end this unhealthy relationship that they're in. And ending that unhealthy relationship is sort of the name of the game right now. Because once we all decide and are able to see that we're in this unhealthy relationship, I think you can have change happen real fast. And again, I'm not one of these people who think needs 60 over the world, right? I think the full cycle of what Bitcoin is going to offer will take quite a bit of time. But even just having energy markets referenced in Bitcoin psychologically, removing both the US dollar as the major reference for energy, because remember that Michael Cow, the urban cowboy, the big macro trader, right? Again, his whole argument was based on preserving the American rules-based system. There is no such thing. There isn't. It's gone. It's long gone, right? We're not preserving any rules-based system. And to have a presupposition that we are the rules-based system is exactly the breakup that we need to have. Now, I'm not waiting for Chinese shitcoin for energy to come as the reference rate for energy either, right? But again, that's what I think Satoshi saw. I think Satoshi understood that in 2008, which is why I think he took the Japanese pseudonym. I continue to believe the Japanese pseudonym comes from saying and having the authority to say to America, you are now Japan, right? Your money is not what it was. You've abdicated the role of global reserve currency because of this disaster. And welcome to the 1990s. And indeed, his prediction was entirely correct. We have lived in America from a monetary policy point of view very similar to what the Japanese experienced in the 90s. It was our lost decade, right? Zero interest rates create all of this trouble. And so we've seen it. Now, if America was to go along that trajectory, what would have happened without Bitcoin? China eventually could have created a credible substitute for the US dollar in the global reserve system and would have had a more inherently political dollar take over the world. It would have been the CCP money, right? The CCP money would have been the reference rate for everything. And then it's social credit and all the stuff that we already see percolating around the world. We see it, right? It's in Nigeria, Canada with one of the most ridiculous frauds going to get this thing instituted, where the federal government, who pays the provinces to administer the free universal healthcare, is now forcing the states to sign up for the Vax Pass, more or less, the health ID system, in order to get the transfer payments to have any healthcare in the first place, right? What a bunch of blackmailing criminals. So luckily, Alberta has said no. And I think in the end, it could disintegrate Canada into constituent pieces. I believe that. I don't know if Canada has much of a future. The Canadian provinces can all do great. I think Canadian people living across the country will do better than ever. But I don't know if the federal deal of Canada can withstand this, right? Because the sacred cow of Canada is this ridiculous healthcare system. And they're about to kill it, really kill it. And we'll see what happens. But maybe they can salvage it. We'll see. We'll see. Now, just so you know that because I got Enmity saying here, Nolan, please write a book on these tactics. Yeah, it's this tactic here, right? The DARVO. The way to get over it is to basically ignore the abuser and leave the space. That's the most effective way, right? The abuser is not going to stop. You're not going to engage with them and convince them to see reality differently. But that's why you have so many American Bitcoiners that are looking to arbitrage geographically and their jurisdiction, and why you see so many Bitcoin American states where less pervasive, and it looks like they're going to have most of their freedoms guaranteed. Now, I think this is temporary. I think Americans will repatriate eventually, but having Americans spread around the world is not a bad thing, right? Not at all. You see American entrepreneurship in certain places where we're used to having all these innovative ways of getting products and services, ease and convenience. You see Americans starting these simple businesses in places like El Salvador, where maybe they didn't do it that way before, but now they can. So you're seeing a whole bunch of cultural mixing because of this, and that's good. That's great, right? That's great for the world. And I think a lot of Americans will repatriate one day. Maybe not today, but once this all is over, it's going to happen, right? CK says, smash the like button. Emity, I've gained more videos. Thanks, Emity. I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it. We're fighting to get over this World War III, guys. We don't like it. We want to be in a cool, chill, happy world again. As Bitcoiners, we are, but we got to keep trying to save more and more people. And indeed, and I think a lot of Bitcoiners have been sort of living their best life, even since COVID. I mean, you got to admit, right, that COVID changed a lot of things for Bitcoiners for the better. And I embraced Bitcoin eating habits, Bitcoin knowledge about exercise and all these things. I was always pretty healthy, average North American healthiness. I was never obese or anything like that, but was able to learn just from the community about the diligence and ease and fun of eating well and buying local and having that resilience. And I'm never going to stop that. Like, I love going to the farm here in Barbados and getting my steaks and getting my unpasteurized milk. And I love it in Vermont too, right? And as long as you're not playing that ridiculous rat race game of living in a major U.S. city filled with crime and no access to good food, and unless you pay a massive fortune and pay a massive fortune to live in the city in the first place. I think a lot of Bitcoiners just broke free of that during COVID. I'm one of them, right? I fled New York City. Now, I cherish the time I lived in New York City. I think it was also one of the best times in my life. I loved it. Every of New York, but it's not for me anymore. And I learned a ton about how to live a much higher quality of life in the way that I do now. So that's what winning World War III looks like in the end. It's not going to Ukraine and fucking fighting people, right? It's about getting unpasteurized milk from your local farmer and turning them into Bitcoiners, and understanding that the incentives to participate amongst each other and to enrich our communal lives are already there. It's already happening, and we're creating a much better world than anything being sold to us by Chris Ray about who to get mad at next, right? So again, do not listen to any of these. My advice, any of these right-wing talking points right now, they're trying to graft a narrative on top of something that a lot of right-wing people are predisposed to. America the good, China the bad, right? I think this is all just being astroturfed into existence in order to reverse the victim and offender order. But if you follow the money, as Bitcoiners are prone to do, I think we're going to find out American involvement here, and there are no good guys. The only good guy left is Satoshi. The only person worth following is Satoshi, guys. Right? Satoshi is luckily has the most credibility in the game. All right, team. That's all I got for today. I'll be doing those pre-records as well for our Moscow time and our recap. Please share them on social media. It'd be great. I've been doing well since adopting the Bitcoin standard. I've cut way back on poison alcohol. Great. Eating better, working out, able to escape rat race 2, even orange pilled my 88-year-old grandfather. Yeah. Yeah, alcohol is one of them. I was already not a heavy drinker, but I completely stay away now. Um, I've had two. Oh yeah, by the way, I'll be on Cosmic Bitcoin Spaces tonight at 7-8 p.m. Eastern. Let me see what my calendar says. But do tune in. We're going to be talking about all this stuff in a conversational way. Let me get my calendar up here. Oh, I don't have it saved in this calendar yet. I think, what time are we at? 6 Eastern. Okay, 6 Eastern. Great, 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 great. 6 Eastern. Cosmic Bitcoin tonight, 6 Eastern. Everyone, we're going to be talking about Bitcoin 2023. We're going to be talking about all kinds of these psyop stuff. So it's going to be a nice conversation. I'll be talking a lot about the book tonight. I bet. I have a feeling I'll be talking about the book a lot tonight. By the way, the only reason I'm holding back on the book at all is because I want to get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Once I hit the 1,000 subscriber mark, I think I can basically change the world. So we got to get to 1,000. That's what I'm after, right? If I get to 1,000 soon, the book will be coming out in no time. So help me get to 1,000, team. We'll be there soon. Peace. CK says, big love. Yeah, I will share it. Big love, everyone. Peace. Subscribe and share to the show. Subscribe and share. Subscribe and share. That's what we like to say.